A room without books is like a body without a soul.
Hello and welcome to Sundoku, the safe space for bibliomaniacs. I'm Michaela.
And I'm Annie Hastwell.
What are you reading these days, Annie?
Well, I'll have to plug the two books I just read because I could not put them down. The first one is Rebecca Kuang's Yellowface, which is very dark, quite hilarious sometimes, but really cringy other times. But it pulls apart the whole publishing game and also the issues of our time, like social media, cancel culture, identity, cultural appropriation. It's a really clever book and, as I said, like funny enough to keep you rolling through. You only have to read the back of the book to know the plot. It's a great setup and it takes no prisoners. Like it doesn't preach in any way or come down on any side. I really like that about it, but it really pulls all that stuff apart and makes you think about how it all works.
Something clever.
I don't think the publishing industry will like it very much.
I see.
Oh, and the other book I read, which our book club did, was James by Percival Everett, which is a retelling of the Huckleberry Finn story with the slave as the central character. Amazing book and a racy read, and it is a book everyone should read.
Sounds like you've been having a great time.
Well, they've been good enough to keep me up late at night.
That's good. Well, I've been painting the house, so I'm back on my audiobooks. I'm really getting into these more and more these days just because of the incredible talent of the readers and bringing all sorts of stories to life. But it was actually a book that Kath put us all onto back in episode 35, so about 10 episodes ago, called Other Houses by Paddy O'Reilly. And she raved about it, and now I know why. It's fantastic. It's narrated alternately between the two main characters, one a male, one a female. And so we've got two narrators there. And it's put as a story of class and aspiration and sort of the lines that you'll cross for the people that you love. She's a cleaner, cleans for these middle-class families. She's quite upwardly mobile herself, but then things start to go wrong in their lives. So there's a lot of suspense, there's a lot of mystery. And the great thing about listening to it on an audiobook is that when you're reading a book, you've got 10 pages left, 3 pages left, this is going to have to finish. You don't know with an audiobook. Suddenly it's just finished. Well, in this case, you don't. And the ending just hits you. So I'm not going to say anything more about it other than read it, or better still, get the audio of Other Houses and do yourself a favour, as they say.
The books I just spoke about were quite dark, but we are actually going quite romantic today. This book, The Wife's Secret, is set in the Queensland tropics with a cyclone threatening, just to get the plot underway. I love weather-led plots. The author is Barbara Hannay. She has sold 12 million books and she's been translated into 26 languages. Those numbers really impress me.
Yeah.
So I'll be talking to her about how she got started, and she got started quite late in life, about this book where the charming and successful Rolf, who was a side character in a couple of her previous books, gets to go centre stage. Isn't it fascinating how fictional characters seem to get inside the heads of authors and demand to be given a bigger part?
Yeah, I never cease to be amazed by the fact that characters do become real to their authors.
I love it.
Yeah.
When I eventually write a book. I can't wait for that to happen.
You'd better get your skates on. Well, I'm actually bringing a Mills and Boon author to today's episode as well, because Mills and Boon Australia has just celebrated 50 years. So 1974 was the first time they were published in this country. In fact, they were published in 1909 in the UK, and the first book ever was called Arrows from the Dark, which does have quite a few phallic connotations if you give it a bit of thought. But anyway, so Mills and Boon Australia celebrating 50 years. They're celebrating with 4 anthologies, and I'm speaking to one of the authors who's featured in one of the anthologies. She's in the one that is all the Outback nurse stories, and hers is called The Outback Doctor's Surprise Bride. So it's interesting that apparently the most popular and longest running genre of romance with Mills and Boon is the medical genre. So people seem to find medicine all a bit sexy or something. Anyway.
Interesting too, because our author today, the author that I'm about to speak to, was a Mills and Boon. So let me tell you about the story. A tropical town is hit by a cyclone. There's a husband and wife who've been divorced for a long time, suddenly thrown together when Rolf, the character, arrives to fix the house that they built together, which has been smashed into by a tree during the cyclone. There's a glamorous opera singer There's their son trying to run a cafe. There's tension, romance, who's in love with who. The heart of the story really is the fragile coming together of this former couple, Rolf and Lisa. So here's Barbara explaining how she sets up a story.
It's always great to have a conflict between characters, and often an internal conflict rather than, some sort of physical battle. But in this story, it actually all came about because I had already written about Rolf in two of my previous stories. He was in The Summer of Secrets that I wrote some years back, already a divorcee and an interesting character, an author, quite successful, but a former builder, which I found a fascinating combination. And I actually did have a friend up there who had epitomised those combinations, so I was inspired by him. And then I wrote about him again in The Happiest Little Town, which was just a couple of years ago. And those stories were both set on the Atherton Tablelands. And one of my writer mates asked me, was I ever going to tell his story? And I hadn't been planning to. But then last year, when I was wondering who the characters might be, suddenly it made all sorts of sense. So then I had to explore in more detail what had been the cause of his divorce and who his wife might have been.
And then along came Lisa.
Yes, exactly, yeah. But because he was already quite strong in my mind, I think I found it easier to find the contrasts, yeah.
Now, weather plays a big part in this story as well, like as it often does. And when we first meet both of them, there's a cyclone threatening.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've lived in North Queensland now since 1972, so I've been through quite a few cyclones myself. And again, it's something that I've never really, that friends have said, oh, you should set a story in a cyclone, but I hadn't. I think often with cyclones, if you're lucky enough that they're not too devastating, it's all the tension and the build-up that's one of the most memorable parts of cyclones.
It's very much a bonding exercise for a community, isn't it? But also,
it can be, yeah.
When a cyclone is very destructive, you hear stories that people change their lives afterwards.
Yes. In fact, I've had readers who know this story is going to be set during a cyclone who've written and told me how they had to leave North Queensland after a cyclone experience for them. So it can be really devastating.
And in this case, it affects the lives of not just Rolf and Lisa, but other characters as well.
Yes, their son Dave, who has just come back to Beacon Bay to open a cafe, and the cafe window's blown in. Luckily, there's not too much other damage, but of course there's all the problems with lack of power and difficulties of getting in supplies, and the fact that your clientele are now too busy looking after their own problems to actually want to come and buy meals. And I also have a young PR girl who's sent up from Sydney because she's the PR girl for an opera star who happens to have a holiday house in Beacon Bay. And when the PR boss discovers that both this author and the opera star are up there where the cyclone is, she sees it as a wonderful PR opportunity, media sort of splashes everywhere. So she enters the story and becomes a love interest for young Dave, the cafe owner.
And then there's Renata, the opera star. She's a bit of a red herring in the whole story, isn't she?
She is a bit, yeah. One of the things that I found fun about writing about her was I actually, during the writing process, I was away on holidays, and we hired a driver to take us from Brisbane up to the Sunshine Coast. He happened to be a former opera star who now, after a health crisis, had totally changed careers, and chatting to him was fascinating. So that sort of cemented my idea that I definitely wanted to include her.
It sounds like you are constantly intrigued and inspired by just casual conversations and things you come across.
I am, yeah. When you only live one life yourself, you have to draw on those are the ones of people you meet, and you never quite know when it's going to sort of drop in and feel like it's right for your story. But I guess I think writers are sometimes a bit like interior decorators or people like that. They're always on the lookout for new ideas and ways they'll put their art together.
Food played quite a significant role in your story as well. It was lovingly described, and I just wonder what that connection is for you with food.
Well, I have had comments before that I have a lot of food in my books. I am a bit of a foodie, and I do love cooking and having dinner parties at home. My husband and I are both that way inclined. We did live on the Atherton tablelands for quite a few years, and when I went away to conferences, he used to have men's feasts up there at our place. So, yeah, but also our eldest son was a chef. So I have to admit Dave is partly modelled on him.
Oh,
and
interesting. And you certainly knew the inside world of running a restaurant. It was quite clear.
Yeah.
So it's taken a long time for him to get into your stories, though.
Yes, it has. I don't usually draw on people close to me, but in this case I did, yeah.
Now, this is a romance, so we can expect nothing to get too nasty. As a romance writer, do you feel that you're sometimes bound by certain rules that there are places you can't go because of your readers' expectations?
Yes, I do, because I've written quite so many books now, and I think my particular readers have certain expectations. I mean, for other romance writers, combining romance with mystery and even crime is really successful. I've had touches of that in a couple of my books, but mostly people are expecting an optimistic ending, at least. Nothing too dreadful happening along the way. I think the biggest thing for me with this story is, I mean, we all know that a romance usually ends with couples getting together, but with Rolf and Lisa, I really wasn't quite sure what I was going to do with them for quite a long way in the story. It was a real journey of exploration for me, in a way, with those characters.
They had been so in love. The separation had been so bitter.
Yes.
And yet, there's several romances going on. There's at least 2 romances in your story going on. But I thought you crossed a few barriers there with romance at different age levels, because Rolf and Lisa have got very grown-up children.
Yes. Yes, they're heading for old age now.
Are there many writers, moving into this area of love and sex at later ages?
Later in life. Yes, I think so. Yes, I have done that before. I had a woman in her late 70s reunited with an old lover that they very sadly couldn't get together in their youth. And she was quite confident and daring, should I say, for her age. So, I mean, I'm now in my 70s myself, so I suppose it makes sense that I'd be thinking about more people in that age group.
So let's talk about your books, because they have been translated into an amazing 26 languages. Did that surprise you?
Yes. Well, a lot of those, the ones that have had those really wide translations, were books that I wrote for Mills and Boon before I started writing for Penguin. And yeah, we were lucky with those companies that they already had a lot of translations set up. With these books that I write for Penguin now, I have had overseas translations, but not such a wide range, no.
What kind of feedback do you get from readers, though? Because your books are very Australian and they're very tropical Australia as well. Is that something that appeals to overseas readers?
Apparently, yes. I used to write quite a lot in the Outback too, and the Australian Outback is fascinating.
I'm curious about how you began to write. You started with Mills and Boon. How long ago was that?
My first book was published in 1999. I had always wanted to write. When I was young, even before I actually knew how to write, I used to draw pictures on pieces of paper and pass them through the slats of orange boxes and make my little sisters sit down and watch the movies I made, So I was that kind of person right from the start. I joined the Brownies, and the first badge I did was the writer's badge. My poor brown owl had never had anyone who wanted to do that before, and had to go and find a tester. And at school, English was always my favourite subject, along with art and sport. I wanted to be a journalist, but this was in the 60s, and my dad said, don't think so, Barbara. Journalists spend all their time in pubs. which they did in those days because that's where the coppers hung out and that's where all the good stories were. So I became an English teacher, and I did that for many years. But when my kids were little, I used to write stories for them and get them to illustrate them and make them into little books. And, so it's always been part of me. But I didn't ever think of myself as writing the great Australian novel or anything like that. And then I was teaching high school English, and we had to do a unit of popular fiction where we looked at romance, action, adventure, detective, that sort of thing. And when I read the romance book with the first Mills and Boon I'd ever read, and we were analysing it in class and being very clever and talking about stereotypes and predictable endings and all this sort of thing. At the same time, I was remembering the books I'd loved as a girl, Anne of Green Gables and Little Women and all those classic girls' books that all had romances in them. And I just started to think, actually, I think this might be the sort of thing I'd like to have a go at. And the next Christmas holidays, I sat down and wrote one, sent it off all confidently. I got a rejection, but enough encouragement to make me want to keep going. I think it was about 5 years later because I was still teaching and had a family and everything else.
You would have learnt a lot from those 5 years, I imagine, too.
Oh, yes. I then read a lot of romances. Up until then, I'd been reading, the books we did for the teaching school and what I'd done in my arts degree. I hadn't read any sort of commercial romance, the shorter ones like Mills and Boon published. So I had to learn what it was the publishers were looking for and what readers were looking for. And then I got the magic phone call from London. So that was how I got started.
That must have been an incredibly exciting moment.
Oh, it was amazing. Yeah, I'll never forget it.
And then what about the move from Mills and Boon to Penguin? How did that happen?
That was actually quite miraculous. I actually got an email from an editor at Penguin who was looking to expand rural romance at that point. And she had heard about me and she asked me if I'd be interested in writing for them, which just, doesn't happen very often.
And you said yes.
I certainly did, yeah. I've loved the chance to expand and go deeper with my characters and have intergenerational stories and all that sort of thing, yeah. Some of my books I've included threads from World War II too, which I enjoyed doing.
When you start a new book, do you strive for a new angle?
Yes. I mean, as we've said with romance, there's always an element of predictability, but yeah, the main thing I'm always looking for is the emotional core of the story. And then I need a situation that I know will have lots of emotion tied into it, whether it's a girl going off looking for her biological father or, this divorced situation or someone suddenly being landed with a responsibility of a child they hadn't been expecting, whatever it is, I want a really emotional situation. Then I work out who it's going to happen to and where and that sort of thing.
And do you do any kind of research, like going to a different place to get the feel of it and to write a description to yourself of where you are?
Often, but I do set most of, if I have an overseas setting, I have travelled overseas a few times, but mostly they're set in North Queensland. And mind you, I'm writing about another story set here, and I think I do need another trip further north.
Of course you do.
Yeah, just even though I've lived here for so long, it's always good to go back now looking at it through the eyes of your character and what would your character see if she or he was in this situation.
And how much hold do those characters get over you? You're talking
massive.
about Rolf, he was there in one book, he was there in another book, and suddenly he needs to have his full story told. It's almost like he is living in your brain somewhere.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's unusual. I don't usually have a character that continues in other books or not very much anyhow, maybe just a mention. But yeah, they do. My husband's a writer too, and we do a lot of brainstorming together, and often at the end we might be driving somewhere and we'll say, I wonder how so-and-so's going, because they do tend to feel real by the end of working with them for so many months, yeah.
So how does the household work? Do you have the same writing habits? Do you both sit down and write each day, or how does...
Well, he was a journalist. We write at opposite ends of the house because he still thumps away on his laptop like it's an old Underwood typewriter. A lot of the time we are off in our own worlds.
And then do you come together and share what you've done and what's happened that day?
Yeah, absolutely. He's a wonderful support for me. I don't think I could have done it all without him. In fact, he's reading a manuscript, well, what I've got of a manuscript so far at the moment, actually. We'll go off and have a chat about it later. I'm very lucky to have someone who it must be hard, I think, for a partner to have someone locked away in a room for so much of the time.
And also with another world in their head too.
Yes.
As far as inspiration over the years, now you've obviously been involved in literature forever. What are some books that stand out for you that have inspired you or changed the course of your life?
Well, one of the books that I sort of in some ways never got over was Seven Little Australians that I read when I was about, I don't know, only 7 or 8 or something.
I'm with you there.
But when Judy died.
Oh my goodness.
I can remember that morning. It was a Sunday morning and I was in bed. My parents were still in bed and I went into their room crying my eyes out. And they said, "What's happened? What's the matter?" And I said, "Judy died." And they were so relieved that it was only a book. But, it was so... Yeah, so I think I learned about emotional punch at a very early age.
Barbara Hannay, Queensland author, talking about The Wife's Secret, that's published by Penguin.
Oh, and I love that she mentioned Seven Little Australians.
Oh, I know. I have a copy of it right here.
It's a book I haven't
and
thought
I
about for so
too.
long.
I think a lot of people would relate to that. But that whole idea of books that make you cry is a really interesting topic of discussion, I think.
Yeah. Things that pull on the heartstrings. Like Barbara Hannay, my author, Amy Andrews, has got a lot of heart, and she had to fight very hard to become a published romance author.
I just thought, all right, okay, well, I will show you that I will write you a book which you will accept and you will publish. And so that kind of set me on the path to becoming a writer. It was rejection that made me bloody-minded, as I always say. And sort of from that day on, I was like, okay, well, clearly I don't know what I thought I knew. Clearly I'm not going to have $1 million deals thrown at me and people knocking down my door to make movies of my books. So what do I have to do? Where can I go? Who can help me? When we came back to Australia, I joined Romance Writers of Australia and I began what I call a apprenticeship, which took 12 years before they finally purchased a book of mine.
Really? Wow. Yep, you are persistent.
12 long years. And see, back then, this was like the early 90s. There was no internet when I first started writing. There was no indie publishing as there is now. There was no other alternative. It was only traditional publishing. And I had always figured that if I was going to be published, I want to be published by the biggest romance publishing house in the world.
I saw on your website you have the words very large, laugh, tingle, sigh. So is that what you worked out you needed for your books to be a success? Does every book need that?
No, I don't think every book needs that. Obviously, every writer has their own voice and their own style. That's my style. That's laugh, tingle, sigh is kind of what I feel that I like and hope that readers get out of my books. I tend to sort of write a little bit on the funnier side. So if I can make people laugh, if I can give them that kind of happy sigh at the end as you close the book and sort of tingle in, relating to sort of the sexier parts of the story, I feel like I've done my job. That's sort of what I feel my voice is very reflective of those three elements.
How many books are we talking here? How many do you write? How many have you sold?
Okay, so I've written 89 books and sold 89 books. I've got 47 to Mills and Boon. So obviously I write for other publishing houses as well. Yeah, that's 89 books in 20 years. So I write about 4 to 6 books a year. Usually it depends. Some years more. I've been through a recent bout with burnout, which wasn't fun during COVID. So I kind of didn't write so many books during that period of time. But it certainly keeps me very busy.
That is absolutely incredible. So how do you do this? So that could you be writing 2 at a time? Could you be writing more, or do you just do one? And what's your process?
I have occasionally worked on more than one book at once. It's not my preference, though. I would rather not do that. I like to finish one project before starting another. But oftentimes you are working on more than one project at once, because you could have finished one book and have sent it off and started another book, but then edits will come back for that first book. So you have to, there's different processes that you've got to have to stop throughout whatever you're doing to go back to a book you've written previously.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, you kind of do work on more books than once, but not in the straight sort of creative sense. You don't. I tend to, now post burnout, I tend to try to write 2,000 words a day, 5 days a week. So that's 10,000 words a week.
That's still pretty good.
I don't say that I always achieve that, but I feel like it's a more achievable goal than the crazy word sort of limits I was writing pre-burnout. So a Mills and Boon category romance, they're about 50,000 words. So obviously if I stick to my 10,000 words a week, I can finish a book in 5 weeks. But I guess mostly the process is a bit longer because you have to send it off and it might come out with revisions. So a book could probably be all done and dusted by sort of 2 or 3 months. Longer books, my bigger romantic comedies and bigger, more contemporary romances can be 80 to 100,000 words. So the same kind of things applies. If I'm doing 10,000 words a week, then that can take you 8 or 10 or 12, weeks or longer to finish, depending on how good you are at not procrastinating on any particular day.
You've got such a work ethic. It's incredible. So this is your job. This is it.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's right. It's my job. I have to put my bottom in the chair, even on days that I don't feel like putting my bottom in the chair. Even if the moments when I feel like every single word I'm writing is utter rubbish, you've just got to, push along and trust the process.
Yeah, yeah. And we always just assume that authors get to pick and choose and, wait till inspiration strikes and go for a stroll on the beach and call it research. But you're like the rest of us, really. You've got to put your bum in the seat and do the work.
Absolutely. I mean, I think if I was waiting for my muse to call upon me and deliver an amazing, storyline and amazing words every day, I would have written exactly 0 books. I have contracts, I have deadlines, so you have to do your best to sit down every day and, write the amount of words you need to write to get to the end and get the book in.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of people out there who, they say, oh, I could write a book for kids. I could write a romance. For the people who are thinking it, can you tell us, how does it work with people like Mills and Boon? Do you get contracted to them for a certain number? Do you get a royalty or a set fee? Can you tell us as much as you're able to about, what these aspiring writers might expect out of a relationship with the publisher?
Sure. Okay. So Mills and Boon have a very standard author contract, which, everybody from the newest author right through to Nora Roberts gets. So, and when I was first signed, I was signed to first a 1-book contract. I had 2 1-book contracts, then I got a 2-book contract, and then I went to 4-book contracts. So obviously, they wanted to make sure that I was able to deliver, and they certainly don't want you to be a 1-book wonder. They're investing in you as an author, so they would like you to be able to deliver regularly, whatever that might be. That's a conversation. It's not you have to write 6 books a year or whatever. It's a conversation with your editor. And so, Mills and Boon pay in advance, which is always very handy. Usually, that will start off reasonably low and kind of build over your career. And then you also get royalties after that. But I think what a lot of people don't realize is that an advance is actually advance on your royalties. So you then don't get a single cent of royalties until you've paid out the advance has been earned out. And once that's earned out, then you start to get royalties on that book, and that gets paid quarterly. Royalties get paid quarterly. And so it can take quite a few books and quite a few years to sort of build up sort of a decent sort of income. Mills and Boon go into many, many international markets. So I'm translated into, 24 markets overseas. So a lot of that money does come from those little international, little big international markets. And another great thing is that you get to see your book in all these different translations, which is incredible.
Do you line your living room shelves with all of these exotic covers?
I have books and books and books and books from overseas. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of what you're earning is in that tail, in that long tail of
Absolutely. Yeah,
yeah.
the accumulativeness of it. And also in Australia we get, PLR, which is public lending rights. So if your books are in libraries, and libraries, do buy a lot of Harlequin novels, then you end up getting money through the government for that, which can be a very nice sort of chunk of money once a year. If certainly, again, it takes a while to build up, but it's certainly another kind of stream of income as well.
I'm talking to you from the Romance Writers of Australia conference that's being held in Glenelg in South Australia. And the theme is trope, actually, which is clever. And you're presenting there. What's the topic you're presenting on?
I'm actually doing a workshop on how to write evocative emotional sex scenes. So that's my kind of sort of niche. I sort of have, as you can imagine, having written 89 books, I've written quite a few scenes like that. And I just think to me, I'm really passionate about it, and really, I feel it's really important that authors, when they're crafting scenes like that, really realize that those sort of scenes are actually emotional scenes. They're not physical scenes. I think a lot of authors worry about, which bit goes where and where's all the hands and all that sort of thing. Whereas actually what readers connect with is the emotion in those scenes, that these two people are falling in love, even though they're not realizing it. When you strip somebody naked, both metaphorically and actually, they're very vulnerable to each other. And the realization afterwards that nothing can ever go back to be the way it was prior to that. So there's a lot of emotion involved in those sort of scenes, and that's what the reader really connects with.
Oh, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way, but as soon as you say it, it makes perfect sense. It seems obvious once you've said it. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but when I was on your website, I think I saw that you also publish gay romance stories. Is that correct?
I have written one male. That is correct. Yes, I've written a Australian rugby series. So there's 10 books in that, I think, now.
Yeah, Sydney Smoke.
The Sydney Smoke, that's right. And one of the characters, one of the rugby players in that is a gay man. Yeah.
Yeah. In today's world, it can be difficult not to tread on toes, not to get things wrong. And there's cultural appropriation. There's men being told they shouldn't really write in women's voices. How do you tread that ground when you're a woman writing about men's sexuality and men's romance and men's life?
A lot of those situations now we get sensitivity reads for any sort of issue where it might be own voices or whatever. So that's what I've sort of done. I had several read throughs from friends who are sort of in the LGBTQ scene, and a good writing friend of mine is a gay man, so he read it through as well. So that was sort of the way that, you're right, it was, it's not really something within my experience, so I wanted to make sure that I wasn't getting any of it wrong. I mean, I think lots of things don't change, right? It's two people falling in love. Doesn't matter, what their gender is. It was just about two people falling in love. But when it came to doing the more intimate scenes, I wanted to really make sure that those were as correct as I could make them, and also, like, I did a lot of research online. I went onto lots of like boards, social media boards, and to really kind of like dig in and read lots of articles to try and get everything, as perfect as I could, essentially.
Yeah, well done. Well, I mean, if you're going to have this series that's looking at a whole rugby team, you'd almost be showing a blind spot if you didn't try and tackle this.
Exactly. I just felt like, of course, there are gay men playing in football teams all around the world, and it's just kind of sad, really, that a lot of the situation is often in that sort of space, that they don't feel that they can actually be out about that very important part of them. So actually, when I was writing this series, I didn't really realize in the beginning that Donovan was gay. I just knew that he'd been married in the past. He had a 14-year-old daughter, and he was always kind of like the plus one for a lot of friends of the sort of rugby team. And I didn't, I think it was book 2, and I was like, oh, he's gay. It was like he like spoke to me. It took me a while to figure it out. Why he wasn't like being a bit of a, occasional manhole like some of the other rugby guys could be before they found their one. And once I realised that, it was like the penny had dropped. So I was able to really then start, because he's like book number 7 or 8, I think. So he was always in my head, being more and more and more fleshed out as I wrote each book. I did keep pushing the story along the road because I wanted to be sure. I wanted to make sure that I knew as much about him and about his partner in the story as I could. So yeah.
Yeah. Did you feel consciously different as you were writing it, in terms of, I'm now writing this for men or I'm writing this for women? Or were you not conscious of that? Did you just write the way you always had?
Well, I write the way I always had, because actually male romance is largely written by women for women. It's not really written for gay men. Don't generally I mean, of course, some they do, but it's mostly straight women who write gay male romance.
Yeah, okay. Now, just switching gears, you're also an educator. So what are you teaching, and where are you doing it, and how are you doing it?
Yes, that's right. So during COVID, myself and 3 of my author friends decided to launch the How to Write Academy and to do online courses. We were seeing a lot of courses online taught by people who didn't seem to have a whole lot of industry experience or publication experience, which is fine. But we felt, as a group of 4 romance authors who have multiple publications, multiple awards, multiple best-selling novels, that we've written over 200 books between us. We've sold over 10 million copies between us. We thought that we could actually write a course putting all of our experience and all of our knowledge that we've gained over 20 plus years between us. So yes, we designed our first online course, which was sold out. The first course sold out, which is amazing. And now we run it 4 or 5 times a year. It's like 10 modules. It's all video based, and there's amazing workbooks as well that go with it. And we then went on and launched a How to Self-Publish course as well. So we've got a couple of courses up our sleeve. We've had quite a few of our alumni have had books published since. So it's been really, the How to Write Academy has just been so positive, and it's just so great being able to share that knowledge with people who are also really excited.
Brilliant. So it's the How to Write Academy. That's how people can find it?
Yeah, if you Google How to Write Academy, you'll find us, and you'll find our courses and all the details.
Oh, fantastic. Now, you don't sound like a person who's got 2 minutes to spare for anything much at all, but what do you like to read, Amy? We have our podcast is called Sundoku, which is the pile of books beside your bed that you never ever get to.
Yes.
What's beside your bed?
Actually, you know what's beside my bed that I've not got to, and I keep looking at it and thinking, aha, I must get to that, is the Jimmy Barnes, his second, he put out, 2 autobiographies. So the second one, I forget what it's called. I don't think it's called Working Class Man, maybe. I think it was the first one, Working Class Boy, then Working Class Man. So that's been on my TBR pile for a while. And also the Sally Fields autobiography has been on my TBR pile for a while. But I read mostly, almost exclusively romance. So I'm always on top of, what's coming out, what's trending, what's new, what's this person doing, what's that person doing, how are they subverting that trope. So constantly doing that, constant research, I guess, in a way, really helps to inform your own writing. And sometimes it's very hard to switch off your analytical brain when you're reading, which is one of the things when you become a writer does become a bit of a bummer. But when you've got a really good book, when you realize you've finished the whole thing and you actually haven't thought about how it was written at all.
That's fantastic. Well, all of your hard work and your writing and your reading and your research, it pays off, Amy. You're a powerhouse in the industry, and it's just been so fortunate for me to be able to talk to you today and learn a bit more from one of the masters. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful.
So that was Amy Andrews talking about her career as a Mills and Boon author.
You're listening to Sundoku, the podcast for people who count books among their best friends. And if you're one of those people, don't forget you can get in touch with us. Send us a review or just tell us about your reading past, the books that got you started, and what's next to your bed.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Michaela Andreev.
And I'm Annie Hastwell. Happy reading. Catch you next time.
This podcast is produced by 4 book addicts refusing treatment.
Kath Keneally.
Michaela Andreev.
Annie Hastwell.
And me, Sarah Martin. Our thanks to composer Quincy Grant for the music. If you want to know more about the books and authors featured in this episode, check out the show notes. And you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at SundokuCast, TSUNDOKU Cast.